friends. I'm Karen, and this is the Family Food for Moms podcast. We're talking about inspiration for family cooking and dining. Last time we talked about the new series that I'm starting, cooking skills we should master, cooking at home, things that'll make our general cooking much easier and more effective and tasty because we've mastered these basic skills. So last time in the introduction, I went through all the things we're going to cover, not necessarily in that order. So today we're going to talk about heat control. I think that's one of the most valuable things to learn, especially when you're cooking on the stove top, and what the differences are between things like a gentle simmer versus a rolling boil. What is medium heat and when do you use it? What is high heat and when do you use it? And later we'll talk about the difference between sauteing and searing in a pan. So let's talk about heat control. Most common mistakes in cooking are heat mistakes. If your food is too dark or burnt on the outside and raw on the inside, then the heat was too high during cooking. So slowly mastering heat control on your stovetop is a huge upgrade to your cooking. Learning how to do it with different proteins, what works best, with sauteing vegetables, etc. So heat levels, you get different stoves. You'll have the gas stove and you'll have the electric stove, and usually they'll have a general idea of what's low, what's medium, and what's high. So get to know your stove and see when, perhaps if it's electric stove, it'll go red at high. Medium will be not quite red, and then low, you won't see that red ring. Just find out what the ways are to know how hot it is, and then check your dials so that you're familiar with them when you're turning them on and wanting to heat things at low, medium, or high. So think in terms of what the heat does to the food, not the number on the dial. So low heat would be gentle heat. And the kind of things you're going to use it for are simmering sauces, so they thicken. Maybe simmering a soup that's got a protein in. You don't want to cook it too high heat because then it gets dry and tough. Cooking your eggs softly, melting your butter or your coconut oil, maybe even keeping food warm or warming it up in a pan with a lid on. So low heat is not often used, but it's for those things. It looks like very small bubbles for liquids, like very small, not medium bubbles when you start to have a bit more action going on. And no aggressive sizzling. The food warms slowly and cooks slowly and evenly. So you need to be patient if something needs low heat, because sometimes we want to turn it on higher because nothing seems to be happening. But then we just need to wait because the pan also needs to heat up. And once that's hot, there'll be a more consistent heat going into the food. But it does take a while at the beginning. And we don't want it to get too high and then we have a problem with the food. Medium heat would be controlled cooking. So sauteing vegetables, cooking pancakes, cooking chicken breasts or other chicken pieces that are in a pan. Most everyday cooking would be medium heat. So you'll hear a steady sizzle after you've added your oil and then added your vegetables. There'll be a light browning or caramelization over a few minutes, maybe a gentle bubbling if it's a liquid. So medium's going to be your default setting. Then high heat. You won't use this as often. It's fast, intense heat. We'll use it to get water boiling, searing meat, maybe stir frying meat and vegetables. So this will be a loud, aggressive sizzle, faster browning and faster caramelization, rapid bubbling. You can easily burn food, so you got to really watch it if you're using a high setting. So high heat food burns quickly if you don't move it. So you also need to know what to do once it's almost at that point where you've got to stop it cooking before it burns. Are you going to add a liquid and deglaze? Are you going to take it off the heat and move it to the side or put it in a different dish? You need to be ready if you're using high heat to quickly move it or quickly do whatever it is to cool it down. So preheating your pan is always a good thing to know how to do properly. Usually you're going to heat the pan before adding your food. So that'll be for couple of minutes. and also before adding your oil. Sometimes you can add the oil at the beginning if you're nervous that it's suddenly going to smoke when you add it. Like coconut oil does smoke a little bit, but you add it early and then you watch it. You want to cook before it starts to smoke. But usually with other fats, you just heat the pan and then add your little olive oil or whatever you need, and then you add your food. If the pan is too cold, the food's going to stick and it's not going to get a nice sear. It's going to kind of detract from its cook. If it's too hot, it's going to burn instantly or smoke a lot and smoke out your kitchen. So oil should be shimmery when it's ready to add your food, not smoke. And if you're using a dry pan, then you add a drop or two of water and it should like dance about and evaporate quickly, not sit there. Then you know your pan's hot enough. So practice with different pans. They react differently. If you have a stainless steel pan, that's going to get hotter and stay hotter, or a cast iron pan, versus some kind of coating on your pan, a non-stick pan. We like to use the diamond glazed pan because it's a lot healthier than other non-stick pans. So try with different pans, turn them on, and then add a little water, see what happens, add a little oil, see at what point it starts to shimmer, and hopefully not which point it starts to smoke. But practice using your pans today or this week sometime and see which pans are ready at what point, how the oil looks. And then when you add a little piece of food, like a little piece of zucchini or something, you immediately see it starts to gently fry when there's oil. Generally, in a pan, we don't want to boil foods because boiling foods makes it less flavorful. And the whole idea of pan cooking is more flavor. So if you add something that's got liquid in it, or the liquid starts to come out of that, it's best to drain that. Just lift it up and use a spatula or a egg lifter and hold the food while you gently drain the liquid into a bowl, just in case you need to add it back. So you want to drain that liquid and get it back to frying. You don't want to have so much liquid, especially watery liquid, that makes it boil the food instead of fry it. So you want to hear that nice sizzling sound, whether you're working with medium heat or high heat. Obviously, it'll be more intense on high heat. So let's talk briefly about how heat transfers to the food. So we've got the pan touching the food, which starts with that sear, most stovetop cooking, or that sauteing, and then it's slowly or gradually goes or moves towards the center of the food. So if you've got a big piece of steak on high heat, you're searing it so the heat starts on the outside, makes a nice caramelized crust on the steak, and then it slowly moves towards the center of the meat. And then depending on how much you want it cooked, you do it for a certain length of time or to a certain temperature. When you're cooking steak, by the way, it's helpful until you get used to how it feels. It's helpful to use a thermometer, a meat thermometer, stick it in. When I do fillet in the oven, the tenderloin, like beef fillet, then we always put thermometers in two parts of the meat and we cook it to a certain temperature as kind of a medium. And then we let it rest for as long as it's cooked before the final check to see if it's cooked enough, because it's going to keep on cooking when you take it out of the oven or off the stove. So heat transfers by the pan touching the food. Secondly, the liquid moving around the food, like boiling or simmering, or perhaps direct heat like radiation, like a microwave. So we're generally going to be working with the pan touching the food or the liquid moving around the food. If we have something in the oven like baked potatoes or chicken kebabs, that's also just direct heat on the food without it touching something like the pan. So we need to know what kind of temperature or what kind of heat to cook each thing on. So as I said, we're going to cook steaks at high heat. Chicken breasts can start at high heat and then be turned down and some liquid added to simmer. So we got to control the heat as we go. So we're always going to start, if it's meat, we're always going to start with high heat to sear it, to make it golden on the outside. And then we're going to adjust the temperature. So there's various ways to adjust the temperature or control the heat. So an obvious one is turning down the plate or the burner, like turning that down, making it a little less hot. It does take longer to cool down because the pan holds a lot of the heat, especially if you're using cast iron. So bear that in mind. If it's too hot, especially on a stove plate that takes a while to cool down, you can lift the pan briefly off the burner. If it's a gas one, it just goes off and it's not going to retain that heat as much, so it's unlikely to need to lift it. But you may need to lift it or move it off the hot plate on a stove that's electric. Another way to cool the food would be to add a little liquid. You don't want to do too much, especially not water, because that can make the food boil or kind of get in the way of the browning process. So a splash of water or stock, or perhaps a little coconut oil or butter, can cool the pan. If you are cooking something like hollandaise sauce and it's getting too hot, then you would take it off the heat, which would be your steaming water, put it back as you need. Then, so you can move the pan, you can add liquid. Also, use the right pan to start with. Thin pans will heat up fast but burn fast. Thick, heavy pans like cast iron take a while to heat up, but then the heat's more stable. So that's good for cooking steaks and things in. So, the biggest beginner mistakes that I've noticed, I'm sure there are more, we all make them. Cooking everything on high. We always think, okay, we've got to cook it on high, it's going to go well, but you do need to adjust. If you're doing vegetables, it's going to be a medium heat. If it's something that's liquid and it's boiling, you don't want it to be bubbling like a rolling boil, except if you're doing boiled eggs. You want to have it at a gentle boil, so simmering, little bubbles around the edge, and a medium heat. So just be aware. Again, your meat, you can start it off at a high heat, get a good sear, and then you can turn it down. You can add your butter and your herbs to the pan or your garlic, and then you baste the meat with the butter to help it keep cooking, but at a slightly lower heat than you started with. So then not letting food brown is another mistake. It's like you cook it on too low heat and then you think, oh, it must be ready, and you turn it or you take it out. And it's really important, especially with meat, to start off with that lovely caramelization, that sear, that brown edge. So you start it off higher and then you check that it's cooked after that. Sometimes you'll put it into the oven to finish cooking. Sometimes you add liquid, like a gravy type liquid, to the steak to finish cooking. Sometimes you baste with butter, etc. But your food must start with browning. It also seals in the flavor, it seals in the juice so that it's more tender, more flavorful, and just generally yummier. Another mistake is overcrowding the pan, especially if you're cooking for a family. It's hard not to put too much in because families eat a lot. So you can perhaps use 2 pans if you have a lot to cook, or cook some and then the next. This goes for if you're browning meat to go in the Instant Pot, if you're browning meat to use in the pan, or you're just cooking some chicken. The part where you are searing the meat should not be crowded. Afterwards, you can add your sauce, you can add your vegetables, that's fine. But at the beginning, make sure not to overcrowd the pan so that your food steams instead of sears. So food needs space when it's being seared. So just a couple of specific examples when it comes to heat. Eggs, low to medium. Medium should be the absolute highest. It really ruins the eggs if you cook them on high heat. Then chicken breast, medium heat. High heat will burn the outside before the inside cooks. Chicken breast takes a while to cook, so you can sear it gently on the outside while it cooks through. And it sometimes works well to slice the chicken breast in half before you use it so that it's not such a thick piece to cook. This goes for whether it's on the grill or on the stove top. And even better with chicken is to marinate it first in some oil, like olive oil and salt, before cooking it. Tenderizes it nicely. Steak needs a high heat to sear first, and then you reduce to medium to finish, or you put it in the oven, or you add the liquid, as I mentioned, like a sauce that'll become a gravy. Then garlic needs a very low heat. It burns very fast. So it turns bitter when it burns. So when you're going to be doing a base for a soup and you've got some carrots and celery, cook those a bit first because they take longer to cook, and add your onion after that. It takes a little less time than the carrot. And then right at the last minute, turn off the stove, add the garlic, and then stir it around. And usually the residual heat will be enough to cook the garlic without burning it. So it's a good thing to train your senses. If you hear a loud crackling, it's very hot. If you hear a gentle sizzle, it's a controlled medium heat. If you smell kind of a nutty smell, especially with butter, that's browning. If it smells kind of sharp or bitter, then it's burning. If you see dark brown, that's good. Black is bad. A gentle caramelization on things is good, but then it can quickly turn to burn, so be ready to cool it or to turn it off before it gets to that point. And then also just keep your pan squarely on the plate. Sometimes it slips to the side and it's half on the heat, and then half your food gets cooked well and the other not so much. So keep it squarely on there. Then I wanted to mention deglazing. So usually you deglaze after you've removed the protein from the pan, and the reason for it is to get your flavor into whatever your sauce or your gravy, whatever you're going to cook next in the pan. So it generally involves adding a liquid. So you've got your, maybe you had onions and vegetables and you took them out, and then you cooked your meat and you took it out, and you've got all that nice stuff left on the bottom of the pan. So then you want to add a bit of wine or stock or broth to the bottom of the pan and use that liquid to deglaze the pan, to kind of scrape off all the extra bits of caramelized food and include them in the sauce. And then you'll take that sauce and you'll either put it into the crock pot with your meat, like your roast lamb, or you'll put it into your gravy, or whatever sauce you happen to be making. You get all that goodness, that yumminess into the sauce. So that's deglazing, and it's really very easy. You don't even have to have a measured amount of liquid. Just cover the bottom of the pan, add more if you need, and then it should be off the heat. You slowly scrape it and add it to wherever you need it. So to recap, it's important to remember to preheat your pan. So you're going to start high. If it's meat, you're going to start kind of medium to medium high if it's vegetables or some kind of liquid. And then you're going to lower to medium to cook through, and lower again to finish off gently. So we're constantly adjusting the heat. Then lastly, for heat control, let's talk in a bit more detail about simmering versus boiling. So big aggressive bubbles would be boiling. That would be like 100 degrees Celsius and over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So that can make the meat tough if you have some meat in there. If it's a soup that you're busy cooking, boiling is not good. If you're simmering, that's good. So small, gentle bubbles, a lower temperature, and that's ideal for soups or sauces or stews on the stove top. If you're making something delicate like risotto or sauces and curries, simmering is going to give you a much better texture. So remember, if you have liquid involved and you're cooking meat on the stove, high boil is going to make dry, tough meat. Gentle boil is going to cook it correctly. And then sauteing versus searing meat. So with sauteing, you're cooking your food quickly in a small amount of fat over a medium to maybe a medium high heat, and usually while moving it around so it doesn't get too hot on any one particular part of the food. It's going to be small or thin pieces of food. The pan's going to be hot but not smoking. The food is stirred or flipped or tossed during the cooking process, and it cooks through while lightly browning, lightly caramelizing. For example, sauteing onions or garlic, cooking sliced mushrooms, small pieces of chicken or shrimp. So you're going to cook it through and develop a moderate browning. Just a note with sauteing, I find that often it helps to put a lid on the pan halfway through. If you're cooking mushrooms, you want to start to brown them and you have a bit of coconut oil or butter. You've added seasoning like salt, maybe a bit of nutmeg or onion powder to the mushrooms. And the same with zucchini. You start them off in the same way, maybe zucchini slices. So then you want to cook them without them getting too brown. So that what really helps is putting a lid over them, and that will make them steam while they saute. So the steam is going to help them cook more, cook faster, and make sure they're cooked through by the time the outside is a good color. If you don't do that, I find often they get too brown before they cook through. So sauteing vegetables, often a good idea to put the lid on for half the cooking time and then keep checking them. Leave them for a good 5 minutes with the lid on at a low heat. But then to finish them off, you can take the lid off again. But definitely keep an eye on them, because if the heat's too high, they will burn. So we're not boiling the vegetables with too much liquid. We're simply steaming them a little bit while they're sauteing. Then searing is the high heat, cooking the surface of the food to create that deep brown crust. So it's very high heat, but not quite at smoking point. Larger pieces like steaks, chops, fillets, browning your meat like a leg of lamb before you put it in the slow cooker. And your food is left mostly undisturbed. So you would do one side of the steak, get a good caramelization, then turn it over. So it's a short cooking time per side, and it's the beginning of the cooking process. So you sear the steak and then you'll finish it in the oven, or you'll finish it by basting it with butter. You can sear your scallops. So as I said, browning a roast, you don't need to do this with chicken, but it is delicious to do this with beef or lamb. Just put it in a pan, brown the sides after seasoning them. Always season first, salt and pepper, brown all the sides, and then put it in the slow cooker. And then add your other herbs so that they don't burn during the searing process. This gives you a good flavorful crust, and it helps seal in the moisture, add lots of flavor. Also, always remember to take your meat out of the fridge 20 minutes to half an hour before you're going to cook it, to let it come to room temperature. Kind of depends on the weather, how long you leave it out there. And chicken is more sensitive, so don't leave that out too long than lamb or beef. But always let your meat come to room temperature before cooking it. It'll make it more tender and juicier. And then remember to let your meat rest, especially beef, for the length of time that you cook it. With lamb, you can turn off your crock pot half an hour before eating it and just let it rest. So, a simple practical exercise for this week. Take an onion and slice it up. You don't have to chop it fine. And then cook half of it in a pan on a low to medium heat. See what happens and how it ends up. And then try to cook another half in a different pan or a clean pan on a high, and see what happens. See how long it takes to cook. See what you think works best. And then remember for next time how to do it. And if you like, you can deglaze a little bit after cooking with a little bit of stock or some water, just a tiny bit, and scrape it off and see how it ends up. Like, it could be a nice little oniony sauce if you just add a tiny bit. Just experiment with that a little bit. Thanks for listening today. Next time we'll talk more about some skills that are important as a cook and how you can grow those. But I hope you can try some of the things we've talked about today and improve your skill no matter what level you're at. I'm always looking to do that. Hope you have a good cooking week. I'll see you next time.